It all started with a routine day, just me, my camera, and a quiet stretch of road. Out of nowhere, I found myself in a situation I didn't see coming, a heated encounter with two officers who seemed to take issue with my presence and my refusal to hand over ID. They weren't your typical officers either, short tempers, quick assumptions, and a vibe that had me questioning their motives from the start. The tension escalated fast, and before I knew it, I was at the center of an unusual standoff, standing my ground while they pushed their authority. In moments like these, you realize how far some people will go when they think their badge is enough to intimidate you. But here's the thing. I wasn't breaking any laws, and I wasn't about to back down. What happened next will have you shaking your head and questioning everything about accountability and fairness. Stick around because this one gets wild. As the tension hung in the air, I could feel their eyes on me, searching for a reason to justify their demands. It all started when I was out filming, capturing some shots for my channel, nothing out of the ordinary. That's when the two officers pulled up, their demeanor already sharp, like they had something to prove. They asked for my ID right away, but I knew my rights. I calmly explained I wasn't doing anything wrong, and that's when things started to shift. One of them, clearly irritated, kept pressing me. "If you're not hiding anything, just show your ID," she said, her tone sharper with every word. The other officer seemed to be feeding off the energy, standing firm but saying little. It felt less like enforcing the law and more like trying to push me into compliance. I stayed polite but firm, knowing this wasn't about rules. It was about control. With each passing moment, the situation grew more intense. What were they after, and why were they so determined to make this personal? As I stood there, holding my ground, it became clear that this wasn't just about an ID refusal anymore. It was turning into a battle of egos, mine versus theirs. One of the officers stepped closer, her hand resting on her belt, not in a threatening way, but enough to send a message. "Why are you being difficult?" she asked, her voice laced with frustration. I could see the impatience flickering in her expression, as if she wasn't used to someone standing up to her authority. Meanwhile, the second officer, quieter but just as firm, was scanning my camera setup. "What exactly are you filming here?" he finally asked, his tone suggesting suspicion. I explained once again that I was recording for personal use, fully within my rights. But that answer didn't seem to satisfy them. Their questions kept coming, circling around the same point, as though they were trying to catch me slipping up. I could feel a tension building with every exchange. It wasn't just uncomfortable, it was calculated. They weren't backing down, and neither was I. What was their endgame here? Why were they so invested in breaking my composure? Something about the way they were handling this felt off, and I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to their persistence than they were letting on. The air felt heavier as the standoff dragged on, each second stretching longer than the last. I could sense their frustration growing with every calm response I gave. It wasn't just what I was saying, it was how I wasn't reacting the way they expected. That seemed to agitate them more. The first officer leaned in closer, her voice now edged with irritation. "Look, we can make this easy, or we can escalate it. Your choice." That's when the second officer stepped forward, holding what looked like a radio, his tone steady but unnervingly deliberate. "We're just trying to verify who you are. If you've got nothing to hide, this doesn't have to go further." It felt like a subtle threat wrapped in politeness, the kind of tactic designed to make someone second-guess their rights. I stood firm, keeping my voice steady. "I've explained everything. I'm not required to show my ID because I haven't done anything wrong." I could feel the tension spike. For a moment, there was silence, just the faint hum of their car in the background. Then, without warning, the first officer shifted her stance, her demeanor hardening. It was as if a silent signal had passed between them, and I knew things were about to escalate. The atmosphere crackled with unspoken tension as they moved to box me in, their words sharper now, their patience clearly at its limit. Every instinct told me to stay calm, but I couldn't ignore the intensity in their eyes. It was clear they were determined to push this further, and I was caught in the middle of a moment that could go in any direction. Just as the tension seemed to hit its peak, something unexpected happened. A third patrol car pulled up, lights flashing but sirens off, and a new officer stepped out, a supervisor, judging by his demeanor. His presence changed the energy immediately. The two officers who had been pressing me backed off slightly, but I could still feel their frustration simmering under the surface. The supervisor walked up calmly, scanning the scene before locking eyes with me. "I hear we have a situation," he said, his tone neutral but probing. I explained, once again, that I was standing on public property, filming peacefully, and that I had not broken any laws requiring me to show ID. He listened quietly, nodding, but I could tell he wasn't fully convinced. Then, without warning, the first officer jumped in, cutting me off mid-sentence. "He's being uncooperative and refusing a lawful order," she said, her voice rising. The supervisor raised a hand, signaling her to stop, but the damage was done. The tension spiked again, and this time it felt different, like I was caught in a power struggle not just between me and them, but within their own ranks. The supervisor glanced at my camera, then back at me, his expression unreadable. "Let's get this straightened out," he said, but there was something in his tone that made me uneasy. It wasn't over, not by a long shot. As I stood there, I couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to take an even sharper turn, and I wasn't sure what they had planned next. The supervisor turned back to the two officers, his tone calm but firm. "Did he break any laws? Has he obstructed you in any way?" The first officer hesitated, her frustration visible, but she didn't respond right away. The silence spoke volumes. The second officer finally muttered, "No, but he's refusing to cooperate." The supervisor sighed and looked at me. "You're well within your rights to film in public, but we need to de-escalate this. Let's all take a step back." For a moment, I thought it was over. That reason had finally prevailed. But then, out of nowhere, the first officer made one last attempt, her voice sharp and defiant. "I still think he's hiding something. Let me check his equipment." She reached toward my camera bag without waiting for permission. "Hold on," I said, stepping back. The supervisor stopped her mid-reach, his voice rising for the first time. "That's enough." The tension broke like a snapped wire, the officer freezing in place. The supervisor turned to me, apologizing for the situation, but I could see the embarrassment in his eyes. Just when it seemed resolved, the twist came. As they prepared to leave, the second officer whispered something to the first, and she turned back, glaring at me. "We'll be watching you," she said, her words dripping with warning. It wasn't over for her, not in her mind. As they drove away, I was left standing there, both relieved and unsettled. The encounter had ended, but the weight of what had just happened lingered. It wasn't just about ID, it was about power, and how far some will go to assert it, even when they're in the wrong. And somehow, I knew this wouldn't be the last time our paths crossed. As their cars disappeared down the road, I stood there for a moment, letting the adrenaline settle. It was over, at least for now, but the encounter left me with more questions than answers. Why had they pushed so hard over nothing? Was it about me, or was it just about proving their authority? These are the moments that remind me why it's so important to know your rights and stand firm when they're being tested. Packing up my gear, I replayed the interaction in my mind, wondering if I could have handled it differently. But deep down, I knew I did the right thing by staying calm and sticking to the facts. It wasn't easy, but it sent a clear message: intimidation doesn't work when you know the law. As I walked away, the lesson was clear. Accountability matters, and it starts with not letting fear win. Encounters like this show how important it is to stay informed, stay respectful, and always keep the camera rolling. You never know when you'll need it.